In this tutorial, what we're going to do is learn something how to use things called functions in programming, and in doing so it's going to allow us to put some text as well into our game as we start to think about building it up. So in computing, what we call a function is a block of code that you can put together that lives elsewhere in a main program, and then whenever you want to use it, you can bring it in and you can ask that code to run. On the face of it, that probably sounds quite complex, but what we're going to do is look at a really simple example, and then we'll look at adding that in to Pygame. So what I've come up with is an idea for a really simple computer program, one that's basically just going to multiply some numbers together. So let's take a look at my thoughts on how that program might work before we've brought in functions. So what I've got here first, I set up a variable called keep going, and I set that to true. So that in itself doesn't do anything. We're just asking the computer to remember something for us. We're calling it keep going, and right now it's worth true. We then start a loop. This always happens. We then start a loop which begins just here and it ends down here. And what my loop says is, as long as this thing called keep going is true, then we're going to continually do all these instructions. As soon as we get to the bottom, bounce back to the top, make sure keep going is still true, do the instructions again, and we'll continue. Eventually, presumably in this while loop, at some point we'll turn that to false, and when that happens, the loop will then stop, and if we had any other lines of code, they'd then be able to run from that point forward. So that's the basic premise of that. What have we got next? We then collect some more information into variables. So it's saying we're going to have a variable called first number, and we're going to ask the user what number they'd like, and we'll store it. So they might type in 5. We're then going to do the same thing again, but for something called second number, we could type in a 6, perhaps the second time around. So I've now got 5, and I've got 6 just here. What I'm then doing is getting the computer to do a calculation and store that in a variable. We do love a variable in computer science. And so I'm saying that result is going to be the first number multiplied by the second number. So that would be worth 30 in the example I've got here. And then we have another step, which is to print out the words the answer is, and a space, and then the result. So I'd say the answer is 30. After that, blank line just to break it up, make it more readable. We then store something else in a variable, which we're going to refer to as your answer. And what we're going to do there is prompt the user to see if they want another go. We then straight away say that if the answer they give us is no, then we'll set keep going to false, and that's all the instruction we want to do, and then the loop would bounce up. If they type in anything else, they could type in yes or y, or no in capital letters actually, because that's not the same as no in little letters, or they didn't type in anything, then this line here wouldn't be triggered, so keep going would still be worth true, so we'd go around again, wouldn't we, and we'd keep saying what number would you like. It would continue to bounce around. But if they typed in a no, keep going becomes false, and when we come back up to the top, here's keep going true, no it's not, it's false, the program would end. That's the way that works. So let's look at what that actually looks like if we brought in some functions instead, because one of the things with an idea like this is that a program really is split up into two different chunks. The first of those chunks is this piece here, and that concerns itself with collecting the numbers, doing the calculation and showing them, and then the second chunk of the program is to deal with whether you want to keep going again, and maybe we could slice that up a little bit. Let's take a look at how we could bring in some functions. Well, what I could do is I could write a function called getNumbers, and I'm going to say that whenever I ask the computer to perform this function called getNumbers, it picks up the first number they want, it picks up the second number they want, calls it 1 and 2, and it sends it back to whatever part of the program asked for it, and it sends back those values. So my 5 and my 6 would get bounced back here. I could set up another function to actually do the calculation. I've called that one do the maths. I'm not very creative. And in order to be able to do the maths, because this block of code kind of exists like its own little program, so in order to be able to do that calculation, it needs to know what numbers you want to calculate with. That's why I've got A and B just here. I've sold it. Whenever you run, you don't need to worry about what you've been given, but you're going to get two things, and you're going to store them as A and B. And then you're going to do the calculation. There it is, A times B, and you'll send back the result. So in this new version of our program, I've got these 8 lines of code here. And at the moment, all I'm doing is I'm teaching the computer a function. I'm not asking it to do it. That's really important to understand. So if I was to just have this and to run this program, nothing would happen. Something only happens when you actually say, I'd like you to get numbers or to do the maths. The actual program, as I've also written, begins just here. So let's see if we can recognize anything else from our original program. We've got keep going equals true, that's still there. We've got that while loop that starts and stops down here, that's still there. But this time what I'm doing is I'm saying that first number and second number are brought together by running that function I wrote called getNumbers. So if you imagine the mouse pointer here is sort of the pointer to what line of code we're running, the order of service here is that we do this line of code, then we do this line of code, then we start to do this line of code, but the computer realizes it can't finish it unless it performs this function. So we then jump up to here, getNumbers, and we do these things. We send back these results, number 1, number 2, and those are stored here and here. We then move on to the next line of code. So we're now saying that I'd like result to be the result of doing the maths, and when we do the maths, we're going to be using the first number and the second number, which we picked up but a mere 1 line ago. So again, in order to do the maths, the computer then has to bounce up here, is the function, and it's going to expect A and B, which is first number, second number, so that'd be 5 and 6, wouldn't it? So that's worth 5, that's worth 6. Do the calculation, and we send back the result of doing the calculation, and then we print out the result after that. And then the rest of the original program sits down here. On the face of it, hearing that for the first time, that sounds like a lot of work. Okay, and that's what I said the first time I saw this. And also, I've got 21 lines of code here, and in my first version of the program, I've probably only got about 10 or 12. So why on earth would anyone ever possibly want to use a function? Well, there's a few different reasons. The example of the program I've got here is a really, really simple one that's just multiplying 2 numbers together. But sometimes you might have a function that does something more complex, and it might be an idea that you want to be able to use over and over again. So for example, I could write a function that encrypts a load of text so that nobody else could read it. And if I've got a function that does that, that's really handy to me. I'd probably want to use that all the time. Every time I collect any input from the user, I could encrypt it to keep it safe and keep it protected. So I could find myself wanting to use that same function over and over again. If I didn't have functions, and my encryption process was maybe 20 or 30 lines of code, and I've got 7 different times that I want to encrypt something, that's 7 times 30 loads of extra lines of code that I'm going to have in my program. That's a huge amount. And if I ever made a better encryption program, I'd have to change it every single time in the code I wanted to use it. But if I got a function, I only change it once, and it applies everywhere else in the code. So honestly, functions are well worth getting to grips with. So let's actually look at that practically in terms of Python. So here's the program I just talked about a second ago, right here, running live on the screen. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab those lines of code, and I'm going to copy those. Copy, poink. And you could load up PyCharm if you wanted to do this. I'm actually going to use idle, I think, today. Let's load that up. IDLE, and wait for it, go. Alright, and I'm going to go File and New, and I'm going to paste that code straight in there like that. All gets nice and coloured in, that's lovely, and I'll need to save it before I can run the program. So as always, I'm going to stick this in my H drive, in Computer Science, Year 9, Pygame, and I'll call this something like function practice, I think, like that, function underscore practice, that sounds good. And let's run the program and watch it work. I mean, we're not going to see any fireworks here. So here we go then. I'm going to type in 5 for my first number, because that's what we always use. And I'm going to multiply it by 6, because that's what I was using before. Ping, and the answer is 30. And I can type in absolutely anything in here, as long as I don't type in no in lowercase letters, and it'll continue. So there, boink. And we could try that again, and again, and again, and again, and the program would work until I type in no, and then it quits. So that works exactly like we want it. So that's the basics of functions. What I suggest you do before moving on to the next part of this is to have a little go at seeing if you can write a function for yourself. What might be useful would be to have it so that in here, rather than having this inside this while loop just here, maybe it would be nicer instead if all of this was dealt with in a function instead. And I'll give you a bit of a helping hand to get you started, then you can have a go at this for yourself. I could do something like a do you want to quit function, like that. Okay, and when it's finished, what I'd like it to do as its final step is I'd like it to return back the answer to the question. So it'll need to return the answer like that. And in order for that to work, you need to make sure you set the answer to something, I suppose. I feel like now I'm actually doing this for you. Okay, I'll better stop at that point. But what I'd like you to do, though, is to see if you can complete that, the do you want to quit function, and then maybe you could remove that line there. That would be nice. And you'd have to replace that with something else. It'll be replaced with, I suppose, do you want to quit, wouldn't it? Like that, maybe. You could do something like that. So you'd need to write some code in here to be able to finish that, and I'll let you have a little play around and see if you can do that. In the next part of the tutorial, what we'll do is we'll look at actually making this work with Pygame. So I'll see you then.